Hey guys, thatguysean.com. Subscribe and like, please. I'll be your friend. I have Mike here today. Mike, what's up?
What's up, Sean?
Hey, thank you
I'll
so
like and subscribe.
You like and subscribe. Yeah, that's the least you could do. Thank you so much for I really appreciate it. I really appreciate you doing this actually. Um, so I have like a lot of questions listed for you, and it's nice because even if we didn't do this, I would still want to ask you these questions.
Yeah, man, I always have great conversations. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm excited. Let's do this.
Okay. So I want to start it from because I know that like you've had like when did we meet? We met maybe like almost a decade ago or 8 years ago.
Oh yeah, something like it depends when you started working
Yeah, it's like
in Korea. Yeah,
2015.
maybe no, I left initially around 2000, so maybe 2014,
Okay, yeah,
13,
that sounds about right.
something like that.
Okay. And so back then I remember like you were lifting weights and doing yoga, but it seems like now you're primarily focused on yoga. Is that right?
Yeah, that's very accurate. Yeah.
How, so can you tell me about that shift?
Yeah. It's up to you how we want to take this
Yeah,
because you can give me a very little bit and I can talk for a long time, right?
do
So you
that.
can just let me know. Yeah, you can just let me know when you want to interject or whatever.
Sure.
Um, yeah, so because I think when we had initially started kind of like hanging out and stuff too, I was bringing you to some yoga classes
Yeah, yeah.
as well, right? Yeah, yeah. So that was really the transition for me. I had basically, maybe to give a little more context, I'll explain just how I got into both.
Sure,
So
yeah.
basically, lifting was my first sort of movement practice.
Cool.
I started strength training when I was about 15.
Okay.
Started going to a formal fitness center when I was about 16 because my mom at the time was a personal trainer as well.
Oh, no way.
And yeah, and I was really like, I played high school football. I was really into sports growing up, hockey and football and baseball and basketball and stuff like that. So I I really got into lifting about 15, 16. That was my first movement practice. And I spent like obsessively 15 plus years doing it.
Yeah.
Um, any hardcore person training kind of knows what that takes, right? I mean, up at 6 a.m. to get in morning cardio before you go back at night to lift, or like basically doing two a days or 5 times a week, six, 7 times a week. I was obsessed. I was a gym rat, um, and somewhere along the way, as it goes, I a girlfriend I had at the time, she was into yoga. She was a yoga instructor. And so she had introduced it to me and I had tried and I thought, fuck this. This is this is difficult.
Yeah.
Like as great of a shape as I think I'm in, at the time I'm playing three sports a week. I'm playing basketball in leagues, right? Like
Yeah.
pickup leagues. Playing basketball, football, and ultimate frisbee every week, as well as doing my lifting and training and running and all that stuff. And I thought, man, this yoga is just stretching. It should be really easy.
Right.
And I was quite humbled with that introduction, just how difficult it was. That was my first sort of um, touch on yoga. Now it's been about 14 years I've been practicing since then.
Right.
So basically, after dating that girl and starting to practice, then when we broke up, that was the thing I sort of kept with me, was going to yoga. And at the time, it was really nice because like Good Life is like the biggest fitness sort
Yeah.
of franchise in Canada, right?
Yeah.
So I was going to a Good Life in Toronto, and they had yoga classes. And I really lucked out because the instructor that was teaching these classes, her name was Edith. She was fantastic. She came from a very traditional yoga background and taught hatha yoga. And so for me, I started going to those classes once a week, just after work, after lifting, after doing cardio training and all this stuff. And I found over time, I started getting a little bit more obsessed. 1 time a week became 2 times a week. Um, and I became, yeah, just more and more obsessed. I liked the way I felt. And for me, that's always been sort of what I'm doing physically.
Yeah.
The side effect of looking good and stuff like that, like especially when I was lifting, it was sort of ego training. But the
Right.
side effect of all those things was that result of how you looked. For me, what I loved most was the process. I love that I get to do it and how it made me feel. And so yoga, when I first started getting into yoga, it was that transition, right? The physical transition of it. Um, Now, fast forward to kind of the moment we're talking about. It started taking over more when I had moved to Asia, to Korea, because the same way I started practicing in Toronto first is what I reached back to when I moved to Korea, which was I needed to really reduce my stress level.
Yeah.
I mean, you've lived in Toronto and you've lived in Korea, right? And so, we both know just how fast paced, Toronto's the biggest city in Canada, right? And you can get caught in living that lifestyle, right? And it goes very fast paced. Um, so moving from that to then like Seoul, and Korea is the most connected country in the world with the fastest internet speeds, right? Like, and it is just bali bali, right? Just
Yeah.
fast, fast, fast.
Yeah.
So what I found was after when I first started working in Korea, it was like 6 days a week of work, 12, 15-hour days, you know how it is.
Yeah.
And lifting wasn't giving me the stress relief enough. And so I started getting back into this was probably almost about a year of not really doing yoga. Then
Okay.
I started finding a studio again and practicing 2 to 3 times a week and allowing that to change my nervous system, right? My physiology so that I'm much more relaxed.
Right.
And as a result, I just wanted that relaxation. I wanted the way, not just mentally how I felt, but my body, how physically I felt. From lifting all the time, you're working like eccentric and concentric phases of the muscle, right? You're trying to like get the muscle to fire and carry a heavy load and things like this. And then it grows when it rests and recover, right? In yoga, what I found was like, oh, I'm actually elongating through the musculature and
Mhm.
like the ligaments and tendons, right? All the connective tissue. And so that also really made my body feel good. And then what I would find is doing it a couple times a week. At one point, I was still playing football and basketball and all these other things. Um, and I had decided the more I was getting into yoga, reading a lot more, practicing a lot more, all those kinds of things, that um, I wanted more. I wanted more practice. I didn't get enough. I was
Okay.
becoming more and more obsessed. Now I'm about 8 to 9 years in, maybe 8 years in at this point. So then I continued to read more, continued to practice more, and decided I think I want to go do my yoga teacher training.
Right. I saw that.
So
Okay. Yeah.
this is Yeah, so this is about 8 years in. But
Okay.
the transition for me was as well. Like I remember working with this guy. I was super tall. He was 6'5",
Right.
really getting into lifting. Never lifted when he was younger, but as like a university student and young adult, then he got into lifting. Whereas I had lifted from the time I was 15 and never stopping, really. I think maybe a few weeks here and there,
Right.
but I mean, I was obsessed. And so uh, he would ask me like, when you're doing strength training, typically you're looking at your program and you look at the variables called like fit, frequency, intensity, time, and type. These are variables that you play around with as you're looking at your strength training program, right? Um, and so this guy would ask me like, you're still lifting a little bit, but now you're doing more yoga. Like, what do you find is a big difference for you? And what I told him was, when you're lifting and when you have this lifting program, every 4 to 6 to 8 weeks or so, depending on your goals and everything, you're going to try to change up some variables, right? So that you don't plateau, so your growth continues, right? So you're looking at these frequency, intensity, time, and type variables to try to find where you can manipulate things so that your growth continues, right? You don't plateau. But yoga, the practice of it, yoga in and of itself deepens. So the stronger you get within the practice, the harder it gets by the nature of the practice. You don't necessarily have to go around trying to change all those variables. The practice itself has that in it. And so when I started really working with this and noticing this as I was practicing more and more yoga, um, I just fell in and became more obsessed and was like, okay, well now after 8 years of doing this, I'm doing it more every week than I've ever done. You know, I'm upwards of 6 to 7 times a week now,
Mm,
sometimes twice a day.
mm,
I had started then going to Bali, and just worked out that the second time I went to Bali, I went on this yoga retreat, and that changed a lot of things for me, changed a lot of my practice, which subsequently changed my life in a lot of dramatic and subtle ways. But the big thing it did was make me more obsessed. And so as I got more obsessed and I came back from vacation, I kept practicing, kept reading, and then had the plan to go do my yoga teacher training. So I did that in 2015, 15 when I left Asia.
Was it the people in Bali that you met with at the yoga retreat, or was it just the overall vibe, or was there a moment where?
Mm. Well, this kind of gets into, for me, what is yoga
Yeah,
generally.
yeah.
Yeah, there's a little bit of that for sure. A little bit of the vibe, a little bit of the people around, people focusing sort of on their practice, whatever that looks like, and all those things. But and Bali itself, like Ubud especially, is very just chill and calm, and a lot of people are there to do yoga and meditation and all these sort of Eastern practices and spiritual practices and stuff.
Mhm.
And so for me, what really started to shift was, you know, what they say in yoga is that yoga is the journey of the self, by the self, through the self, to the self.
Mhm.
And so that just sounds like a lot of like, yeah, all right, man, like woo woo, whatever. But it's not just metaphor. It's about it's a true transformational practice, the way I see it.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's what it was really doing, was I was being introduced to myself at the deepest sense, and seeing the ego self, right? The sense of small self, of Mike, of me, identified with this body and stuff. And that's what they say about this yoga practice: is working this practice, you transcend the ego self, the identification with the small self, and you connect to an identification with a bigger self, right? Like a godhead or the universe or something like that. And in fact, that is what yoga itself, the word, means: to yoke, to unite, right? To bring these things together. And if you're looking at this sort of like eightfold path, like the Ashtanga, the eightfold or eight limb path, that's what the sort of goal, if there is a goal, is towards mm, samadhi, right? Enlightenment is sort of the idea. So that was my first sort of introduction to, but I didn't know most of that at the time. What I knew at the time was I feel good,
Mhm.
right? Like it changes, it's changing my physiology. And now I have the words around it, but I didn't at the time. It was changing my state of consciousness as well.
Mhm.
You know, to be honest, like when I started practicing, like I would smoke a lot of pot, right?
Mhm.
And when I would go to yoga, when I would finish, I would feel the same way as if I just smoked a joint.
Right. Yeah, I had the
And
exact same
so,
experience.
yeah, and so what I found was, this was when I was living in Toronto, and so
Yeah.
I would feel like, oh, after, like I woke up at 5 a.m., went to the gym, right, 6 a.m., then went to work for 8:30 a.m., right, then got home from work, then went to yoga practice, right, that day, let's say, instead of going back to the gym. And so then after yoga practice, I would feel so relaxed. I would mindfully, calmly take my time going home, versus getting caught up in the rush to get home and to get the next thing done.
Mhm.
And what that felt like was just like I smoked a joint. And so that moment for me really made me realize, I need more of this practice because there's something going on here. Now, fast forward again 8 more years or whatever, right? 7 or 8 more years. And I've done a lot of practice, a lot of study, a lot of research, investigation, all of these things. So I have a lot more understanding and terminology around what was happening. But essentially, that was it. I just started feeling better. And I'm a person that, for me, movement is really my medicine.
Mm.
I don't feel connected or myself until I'm like having the right dosage of movement, whether it be in a day, a week, a few days, something like that, right? And of course, we know it's like the catecholamines, right? The neurotransmitters, uh, different physiological processes happening that are the reason for that. But yeah, the practice itself, I became obsessed with. And if I can just keep going off on this little
Yeah.
rant, yeah.
Mhm.
So yeah, just this journey of the self through by the self, through the self, to the self, right? This is what right now a lot of jujitsu players are getting more into yoga.
Right.
And I think even Rogan has really sort of quoted this saying by this jujitsu player that yoga is the martial art you do against yourself,
Mm.
right? Where it is about working with your own stuff. And so the Ashtanga, right? The Ashtanga, the 8 limbs of yoga. I mean, that's what you're working through, right? So it has these sort of observances. You have yama and niyama, which are like sort of social behaviors, like don't steal from others, these kinds of things. Then internal observances, right? Which are the niyamas. So things like cleanliness, right? Those kinds of principles. These are parts of the yogic practice. The third part is the asana, which is what most of us think of as yoga, right? These postures, this movement. That's just the third part of this eight limb path, right? So then after that, then you have other parts of this path. Pratyahara, which is sort of like a sense. You withdraw your senses and you go within. From Pratyahara, you have dharana, which is more of focusing your attention on one object in space. So it could be like if you're doing a meditative practice, it could be focusing on your breath work. There are many different types of meditation, but that is one simple example. From that, then you have dhyana and samadhi. And so dhyana is really when you have more of that sense deprivation from external and you're focused solely on the connection of internal and the uniting of the small self and the big self, that kind of thing. That's when you get to this samadhi, this enlightenment period, the state experience of union, of connection with everything that is one. Well, if anyone has done any psychedelics, I mean, or even cannabis, really, you can have those insights, right? You can have that state experience of connection of oneness with everything around you. This yogic practice is really more of training your physiology and your body and everything to get to that state.
Right, right. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. This is
Deep
the
dive.
thing. Yeah. Well, this is what I meant. Like I can just sort of keep going because this is one of the areas that, I'm so interested in as well. But it,
Uh,
for me personally, is something that I continue to work.
right,
But the point being that yoga is seen as this sort of true transformational practice.
right.
Now, for a lot of people, it is not that. And
Mhm.
that's great too. Like when I first started out, it was just a way to stretch because I don't do that. I lift
Yep,
weights and I do cardio and I play sports. Probably stretching is going to be good for the integrity of my connective tissue, right?
right.
As well as some other things. And that's how I started. And it just over time, as I kept practicing, the practice deepened. I wanted more. I wanted to learn more. I had some really sort of strange experiences on the yoga mat that made me want to delve deeper into things.
Yeah.
So I'm happy to explore that if you'd like, or to keep going with more of a general sort of.
Well, let's do, I know like when I did yoga in Toronto, I definitely had a couple times like at the very end when you're just chilling and meditating, where I could have like really cool visions and really cool, right? Which was, it does almost seem psychedelic. And you're like, whoa, how did I get to this place? And it's so real and nice. Um, so also like I know meditation is a big thing for you because if you follow you on Instagram, if someone wanted to, uh, you can see that you will post sometimes like how long you've meditated? Or how does that work? I'm kind of
Mm.
the app that you use, it
Yeah.
culminates. How does that work?
Okay. Well, I'm just using the Calm app. LeBron James also uses this
Oh,
one.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A friend of mine, Kathleen, she sort of recommended this to me,
yeah,
and I got into it just as a tracker. I just wanted to use it as a timer to set my intention to meditate for. At the time, I think I was trying to do 10 minutes.
okay.
To just sit and do 10 minutes. So I basically use the app just for that. There are a lot of different behind paywall things you can use the app for,
Sure,
like different guided meditations and things
right,
like that. But I sort of just do my own
sure.
thing. Yeah, but if you'd like me to sort of riff with what you're
Yeah.
saying about meditation, then
Well,
then I'll
how is
pull
that
that
like?
and kind of.
Yeah, for like what yoga's done for you, what is like meditation done for you, and why do you keep doing it?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah.
I always get
That's a
into it
great
and I'm
place to
like,
start.
oh, things are going better. I think I'm done with that. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But you've stuck with it for a
Yeah,
long
so
time.
well, there's a lot I can kind of go with there.
Yeah,
Let me start with sort of the difference between practice type, right? Like as
yeah,
you're saying, you sort of start it and then like, oh, I feel good, stop. Whereas I'm continuing to go with it, right?
yeah,
Like, so for me, that is the point of the practice. Um, in behavior change, right? Because like my sort of past life working in behavior change and working, in health promotion and those kinds of fields in Toronto, right? Trying to
mm,
get people to change their behavior so they reduce the risk of stroke and all these other cardiovascular
yeah,
diseases. So um, when I look at that practice, that is exactly what it is, right? People in behavior change still have this goal. Oh, I want to lose weight. They do things, they accomplish this goal, they've achieved the goal, they lost weight. Then what happens? It comes back. Why? Because a new goal is not set. It's not managed. These kinds of things are not considered, right?
mm,
Um, so it's really about consideration of what is the practice. So or like the gym was like that, right? I'm going to get bigger arms, to get a six pack, to this.
yeah,
Whereas, as I said to you before, for me, those things were always the side effect. I love the work. I love the process. That the practice to me is what I'm obsessed with. I love that I get to do it. Always leaving the gym was worse than going to the gym for me because I get to do these things, right?
mm,
Um, but really, what's happening is this keeping the momentum of this change, right? So you get this state experiential change of your consciousness, right? Like, I feel connected, I feel enlightened, I feel this way, but it it changes, right? Because the state experience is exclusionary. Whereas if you're working to have all these changes sort of solidify over time, that becomes this permanent trait of your being, of your consciousness, right? And it's not just wishy-washy words, right? If
right,
you look at Altered Traits is a great book by Daniel Goleman, who is the pioneer of emotional intelligence quotient, right? EQ, Harvard professor, not teaching at Harvard, but got his PhD from Harvard. Daniel Goleman and Richie Davidson from Madison, Wisconsin, I think, University of Madison, Wisconsin. They basically came through the Harvard period just after Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, who maybe you're familiar with those guys. No, okay,
no,
no.
no, but
Generally, Timothy Leary was famous for the tune in, turn on, drop out, right? He was doing Harvard sanctioned LSD experiments, right? In
okay,
the like early 60s, early 70s, late 60s. And one of his, just under him, one of his sort of colleagues, Richard Alpert, went down this avenue, became eventually the famous person we know now as Ram Dass, right? Be Here Now, this sort of spiritual teacher, right? But they were both in the psych department of Harvard during this time and the LSD experiments and stuff. And then a few classes under them in this sort of the same wave are these guys, Richie Davidson and Daniel Goleman. Anyway, so this book just talks about a lot of their research from that time to now, looking at the different effects of different meditation practices, different hours put in, all of these sort of things. And that's what they're looking at, is not a state change, but when does a permanent structural physiological change happen? When do we start to see changes in gray matter in the brain, in insula, right, in the amygdala, in all these different areas of the brain from sustained practice? Do different meditation styles affect the structural changes and all of these things, right? If you're doing mindfulness versus like a heart meditation, blah, blah, blah. So for me personally, how have I stuck to it? Well, again, the answer is very long-winded. It can be very simple. It feels good. I feel so much better, more connected, more able to take on the day. I start from a lower set point of, like in stress management, we call it the hair trigger stress response. And we all know people like this, right? People that are, you say the like most innocuous thing and they snap because they're already operating from a high arousal state of stress, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not just an internal sort of idea about these things. There's a physiological arousal state, right? And so it's working with your physiology. So for me, that's what it gives me. It gives me all of this calmness. I start the day with more equanimity, right? But now, in general, I would say my meditation practice, as I've been, like right now, I sit about every day 25 minutes. It's been about 2.5, 3 weeks. I've upped it to 25, from 20 minutes a day. But I'm on 1,120 days in a row doing this, something like that. And over the last 4 years or so, I've missed a total of maybe 10 days during this whole time. But I was first aware of meditation and wanting to do this when I was in my like second or third year of university. It's taken me this long to build a practice. And so, you know, you always hear from people when they're starting out or when they're talking about meditation or interested in it. It's hard. It's difficult. How do I start all of these things, right? Should I go to a 10-day Vipassana retreat, right? What should I be doing? So for me, it was when I became aware of it in university through one of my good friends, Rob, who put me onto a lot of this spiritual path. And in Halifax, Nova Scotia is really sort of interesting in terms of these lineages, because in Halifax, the first Tibetan Buddhist monastery built in North America is in Nova Scotia, in Gampo Abbey, Nova Scotia. One of the sort of most famous Tibetan Buddhist teachers, Pema Chodron, that's where she is based. So if you read any of her books, Comfortable with Uncertainty, Going to Pieces, no, Uncomfortable with Uncertainty, Things That We Fear, these kinds of things. She's from there. So there's all of this, and there's a Shambhala Tibetan annex associated with the university I went to. So I was always kind of all around this stuff and started reading more books related to this because I studied psychology in my undergrad, and they are very complementary. And so as I got more into reading works of like Mark Epstein, Going to Pieces Without Falling Apart, Thoughts Without a Thinker, these kind of Buddhist infused ideas, it opened me up to a lot of this stuff. But I still couldn't just sit still. I couldn't just sit still. That is, as I'm sure you're well aware, very difficult to do. And in our fast-paced society, right, modern society, the information age, and the attention economy, we're conditioning ourselves ever more so to make it impossible to just sit still and be mindful and those kinds of things. And so, yeah, I first got put onto it and tried and couldn't do it, couldn't build any program, blah, blah, blah. This brings me to yoga. What a lot of people also think of yoga traditionally is that all of this practice, like asana and breath work and all these other things, is to prepare the body and mind to be able to sit in meditative state for hours. So all of this is groundwork to prepare, because, like, how can you sit in half or full lotus, right? Like with your legs like this for hours? It is difficult. It's hard on the body. The average person cannot do it. So you have to do all of these things to prime the body. Now, for me, it's been so long I'm doing it. Sitting the sort of normal way Westerners, especially we do, is difficult for me. Sitting in like the chair normally, I won't do anymore. I sit always with my legs up, right? Um, but so a lot of the yoga practice, what I started to find was it's starting to elongate this sort of meditative state I have, even though I'm not doing a full meditation. So I started to see it as moving meditation. Okay. This is kind of like when people say, oh, a runner's high. I like to run. That's my meditation. So I was in that same avenue. Well, I don't meditate, but I'm doing yoga. I'm sure meditation is great. This is working for me.
Mm.
Keep going in my practice and deepening. One of the sayings in yoga I love the most is yoga chitta vritti nirodha. It's like yoga quiet, depending on which scholar you read from and all these things. Yoga quiets the fluctuations of the mind,
Mm.
right? That for me is what I really fell in love with about yoga, is that there's a whole philosophical aspect to it as well. There are many different paths of yoga, right? There's like just hatha yoga, right? You're doing sort of this physical practice. There's karma yoga, this sort of devotional practice. You're giving to others and taking care of and doing charitable work and stuff. There's bhakti yoga, bhakti, which is the devotion to the chanting. You hear like Krishna Das. This is his whole sort of thing, is call and response and chanting and stuff like that. There's something called Gyan or Yan yoga, which is the yoga that I sort of resonate with, which is the study of it, the sort of reading the articles, the scholarly articles, the academic journals, the works, those kinds of things, and the philosophy of it. And so when I started really practicing and started reading more, it led me to these things. If that is what is happening, I'm practicing, and what I'm finding is that through my practice, I'm thinking, and there are moments when I'm just in flow, right? Playing a lot of sports when I was younger, I recognized that absorption, that flow, right? When there's no separation between thoughts and thinker, between the doer and the thing being done. There, you are immersing with that. Time stands still, right? Your relationship with time. This is why it feels like the psychedelic experience, right? Because all of this sort of sensory information gets oriented to in a different way. And so, yeah, I found that if this is what's happening, it is just like a flow state. Okay, let me read people that have read more, written about these things. If I to see how I can help guide my practice, should I continue to do more of this kind of thing? And definitely it led me to more of the philosophical teachings, which again, back to this sort of transformational practice. This is why it has the spiritual aspect to it, because it is quieting the fluctuations of the mind. Well, what you start noticing is when you're practicing on the mat, especially because it is physical, you start doing certain things like, this sucks. This is hard. I hate this. My God, I can't hold this. I can't. And you're resisting a lot of things that are, right? Or there's another thing that might happen. You start looking around and attaching to things. This is great. I'm doing well. That girl in this class is hot. This teacher is cool. I like this. I don't like this. I love this pose, whatever, right? And what I start finding, just starting from that sort of dichotomous framework I could see happening inside me, reading the text, and you discover, oh, this is what has been written about. This is a manual. So they have something called the Panchakleshas, the 5 afflictions. 2 of those afflictions are what I just described, attachment and aversion. And certainly that's how the Tibetan Buddhists put it. But in the yogic philosophy, which sort of predates some of this stuff, right? That's what it was teaching, this attachment and aversion. And so I could start to work on, attachment and aversion, not being in one state or the other, but trying to release all of them and being in the practice. Well, and how do you do that? Well, through the breath. The breath is the guide, the breath is the guru. It is helping you go through that. So you're connecting with your breath through that. So generally, how does it tie back to the meditation for me? All of these things allowed my body and my physiology, my state of mind, all of these conditions, it created the conditions for me to be ready to sit in meditative state. And now I still wasn't doing a meditation practice because it's still hard as fuck for me to sit still. So it was when I did my training in India that things really started changing, because I was doing intense practice. So my training in India, I was in Dharamsala in the Indian Himalayas, right? And so like the Dalai Lama lives in this little area, it's in the mountains, it's amazing. But it's intense practice. And so you're doing whatever your 10, 12 hours a day of practice, which is study, and 3 hours of asana, right? 1 in the morning and an hour and a half in the morning, hour and a half to 2 hours in the evening. But we're also doing an hour of meditation. And so I was really fortunate. I had this really good instructor, Jayo, he was really influenced by Osho's meditation.
Oh yeah.
You know,
Osho. Yeah. I've watched some of his stuff. Yeah.
Have you seen the Wild County or documentary about his sort of, it's on Netflix?
Yeah. I know there's lots of different thoughts on him, but in general, I like his speaking.
Yeah.
Things got out of control. Things got out of control.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's his meditation techniques and teachings are really fascinating. And so anyway, this teacher was inspired by a lot of his sort of teachings on meditation. So he exposed us to a lot of different meditation styles. For me, during this practice, I would have experiences in meditation similar to what I've had on psychedelics.
Right. Okay.
And so I could really start to see this sort of debate of exogenous versus endogenous neurochemistry, right? Or chemistry, right? And but also just trying to be open-minded with the practice and just experiencing it, right? And just to see what will it do, what does it do for me. But it was just the practice of an hour sitting every day. It was so difficult. There's different practices we do. Sometimes you do a movement meditation, so you move and then you sit still and all these things. All of it designed to perturb, right? To perturb what's inside you and then have you sit in stillness to observe it. It was, from 4 to 6 weeks of that sort of daily practice allowed my body to be ready, primed for sitting. So then as I went off for the next year or so, I started building my practice, which was just a daily habit. Okay, let me sit for 5 minutes. Let me sit for 5 minutes. Just do 5 minutes a day. You can do 5 minutes, just do 5 minutes a day. And I worked that up to, 10 minutes. Then when I was back to the work life stuff, which gets difficult, I was doing about 15, it would depend on days, but 15 to 20 minutes a day, depending on my schedule and stuff like that. But that was basically how I built the momentum of my practice to then start doing it. 5 minutes eventually became 10 minutes. Oh, slip back 5 minutes here, right? And I kept building. So as I said, it's been 3 weeks-ish now, I've just built up to 25 minutes to sit. My goal is about 30. I just kind of want to see what the right dosage is for me, meaning what is the least amount of time with effort I need to give me the best benefits, right? Like that sort of Pareto principle, 80-20 kind of thing.
And so, if someone's sitting through with us and they're listening to you talk about yoga and meditation and how serious you take it, I'm guessing that you don't, after you do that, you don't go and eat a Big Mac Like it's also like you're also very serious about nutrition.
Yeah, well, I kind of have been for a while. You know,
Yeah.
when I first, as I had mentioned, I first started lifting when I was about 15, right? Um, and I had been lifting since then. But when I got to university, I was really blessed. I met like a lot of like my good tight friends, especially like my boys who
Mm,
are a bit older than I am. These guys were all meatheads. They were all just like most of them were personal trainers. They're all into lifting. They were
mm,
shredded. Everyone was just shredded. I mean, and not just my immediate group that I became close with, but all of their friends. So
mm,
at this point, it's like a classic sort of 12, 15 person meathead sort of get together, right? They took me under the wing, taught me how to live, essentially, how to lift, how to party, how to study. Um, so when I got with them, that's when I got more serious about nutrition. I didn't really know. I was like, what do you mean? Like they would tell me things like, abs are made in the kitchen. You know, it's not your lifting as much as your nutrition. It's 50, 80% of all of your physical goals are from nutrition. So I had to start like reading and learning from them and all these things. And it's gotten my nutritional sort of requirements and everything has changed over the years, but I've been mindful about it now for a long time. Yeah, so will I eat a Big Mac after yoga? No, but will I have like a sort of a vegan burger afterwards, or maybe even a real burger afterwards? Maybe. It just depends sort of on the context, right? Like,
okay.
um, yeah, like I've been to certain extremities with a lot of things. You know, when you're just trying to find out what the boundaries and parameters are for any endeavor, you're trying to find out what they are, especially for yourself, right? So for me, I've usually had to unfortunately go very rigid
Mm,
and then very relaxed to find where the middle ground is for myself. Um, the rigidity is sort of natural to me, which is why, when people find it harder to sort of build a physical practice, I can kind of empathize because it's not that difficult for me because I've been doing for so long. I have so much momentum. What's harder for me is what you and I were chatting about offline beforehand is like language practice,
right.
music practice.
Right.
These sort of behaviors are a lot harder for me. So I really have to use the same sort of behavioral modification program I use for other endeavors in that area. Um,
But you're also doing it like intermittent fasting.
yeah, yeah,
Can you
yeah.
talk a little about that or how you do it, especially because I feel like you have your own way of doing it? No?
Yeah, yeah, I've been kind of on. So to give a little bit of background, when I then really got into lifting with a lot of these guys, it was I converted to that way of doing things, the classical industry way of doing things. 6 to 7 smaller meals a day. So metabolism, soak the fire. Got to have protein, right? I was like supplementing, but then also making sure that I'm doing the right macronutrient ratios, right? Protein to fats to carbs, and then micronutrients. And I was doing things like most meatheads have done, like spiking your insulin levels with dextrose to get creatine to do all this stuff. Like I was really not being good to my body, even though I thought what I was doing was being healthy, right? Lots of protein bars and protein shakes, and it's orange creamsicle, but it's a protein shake. It's got to be good. Like and as you keep working through anything, hopefully you keep growing and deepening your knowledge and stuff like that, things change, right? Your opinion, perspective changes. So I probably started intermittent fasting, it's 2021, I probably started around 2013 or 14. When I first had become aware of it from this guy named, what is his name? It eludes me at the moment.
Yeah. We'll come
Um,
back later.
engineering the Yeah, his book is Engineering the Alpha, Man 2.0,
Cool.
Man 2.0 Engineering the Alpha. Yeah, this guy's got I almost had it. Anyway, this guy, he's a writer for fitness magazines like Men's Men's Health and Fitness, Muscle and Fitness. He wrote forwards and did work with Arnold Schwarzenegger and stuff like that. And so really came from that sort of background as well, as he has sort of the scientific basis behind him. And he had started talking about intermittent fasting. And when I had read that book, the things he identifies that will be challenging are the psychological hurdles to intermittent fasting, not the physiological. In other words, you're so used to, especially 6 to 7 smaller meals a day. You like, I'm used to this, right? I'm used to all this meal prep, going to work and having this every 2 hours, got to eat, and like being anxious if I don't, right? Because all the quality of muscle that I might be losing and all this other stuff. And so this book really challenged me, the way this guy thinks in this book and stuff, challenged me to start thinking about things differently and to go experiment and try. And for sure, because I was used to my energy coming from glucose, right, from glycogen stores, from sugar, I was finding certain moments difficult, right? And I'd always get that 3 in the afternoon crash, right? Get hangry and stuff like that because my blood sugar was fucked up because I'm eating every 2 hours or so, and I'm eating a lot of carbs and a lot of bullshit, right? Whereas now it's a lot more like Michael J. Pollan style: eat real food, not too much, mostly plants. So this intermittent fasting style, it was that. So I started okay, let me just start by getting a feeding window. Let me reduce, let me be more mindful of when I first eat and when I last eat in a day. Let me just sort of be mindful of that and then work within those parameters. So let me just say, okay, well, today, I don't know if I can do whatever, a 10 and 14 split. So let me just start with 12 and 12. Okay. From the first thing I eat in the morning, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. That's how I sort of learned everything, right? So once I eat, I have 12 hours. Okay. So from there, then I started reducing it. Well, what does 10 hours look like? Where you're only eating over a 10-hour window. Well, what does it look like to fast for a full day? These kinds of things. So, fast forward now, and now there's a lot more science around it, a lot more terminology distinctions between intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding, all of these sort of things. And there's a lot of room to sort of play with how you do it. So for me specifically, like, for example, I just came off a 39-hour fast, right? It would have been a lot easier if I were working still, because when you're working in a 12-hour day and you get locked in, and that's what I found to be the biggest thing for me when I started really fasting, was the cognitive effects. I found that I'm not hangry, right? I don't get that spike of like, I gotta eat now, I'm gonna kill someone, right? From the carbs and the sugar. And I found that I have energy for a long time, especially intellectual energy. I can lock in and go to work for hours being focused. I can speak for a while being focused without being pulled off track in that kind of way. So now I just did this 39-hour fast. I'd like to try a 3-day fast is sort of the upper limit of where I'm looking at. But I didn't do the refeeding the other day very well. I basically was like, okay, I'm going to calmly make the meals and slowly introduce food that would be appropriate and then stagger it. And then as soon as I started to get into some especially like simple carbs, I just was like, I'm going to eat it all now. So, I'm still struggling, still learning, figuring things out that work for me. But even I'll say the biggest sort of trick hack that really changed for me with regards to fasting, traveling and like meetings, they got way better for me that I've got into fasting. So it's like working in Korea, especially. You can have these sort of like last minute work meetings, and the CEO wants to come and like have everyone in a room from 10 p.m. until maybe 1 in the morning to read articles and do intellectual discussions and stuff like that, right? And when I was still in this sort of 6 to 7 meals and stuff like that, that would be hard for me. My body, like I also am crashing, right, energetically. But when I would have a meeting like that, I just fast all day. And so then by 2 a.m., I'm still good. I'm still the same energy levels, still locked in. Traveling, especially the same thing. If I always fast when traveling now on flights and stuff like that because I hate the jet lag feeling and all of that stuff. And this really reduces that by just not eating, not putting myself into this cycle of making my body work to giving these energies, making my body work and use these energetic resources for these purposes, right? I'm able to just calmly move through space. So I don't know. Do you want me to talk more specifically about how I'm doing it, or just
No,
like?
no, that's cool. No, that was great. I feel like every single thing we've done, like yoga, meditation, nutrition, all the things I wanted to hit, and you've given kind of the same amount of time for each, which is quite nice. Um, I'm also like very like personally interested in, right now you're not working, right? Right. And so you've been able to do that by like budgeting, and you're also a person that spends money on the things that you really care about. And so I just want to know like the thought process of how you've been able, because a lot of people have to struggle with this, how to budget to give yourself the life that you want. And how do you see money? How do you view money as like, with your spending, right? Do you know what I mean?
Wow. Oh, I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, that's a great question because it does tie into the other avenues that we've been discussing.
Right.
Absolutely. There are a lot of things I really want to riff on with this.
Cool.
How do I view money? It maybe is the first one because I'm still struggling to change my relationship to that.
Mm,
I want to see it as just energy.
yeah.
Money is just energy. I
Yeah.
want to see it that way. I love the way Sir Richard Branson says that money is just a tool to make things happen.
Yeah.
And when I first met him doing a book signing in Toronto, that's what I sort of viewed him as, this person that seems to be a good guy, seems to just be a good person, wanting to do good work, caring for people, but he's also super wealthy.
Yeah.
How, everything I've read up until that point is the opposite because I first read like Donald Trump's The Art of the Deal and stuff.
Yeah.
And I always grew up sort of, I mean, there was a period of my life when I was young that my parents had a little bit of money.
Mhm.
Um, but for most of my life, it's been poor.
Yeah.
I've been living a poor person's lifestyle, right? Grew up very, very humble means, and especially when my parents divorced and all that stuff, right?
Right.
So I want to see money as just that, a tool to make things happen, and it's just energy flow, and that's great. Um, However, money is also the root of all evil. It is also a thing that can hurt. Money can be ugly confidence, which is a David Gray term I love.
Mhm.
Um, so when I was young, my parents like to say I had a champagne taste on a beer budget.
Mhm.
And I certainly had a lot of tendencies to, if I had money, oh, they say the saying is that it's burning a hole in your pocket, right?
Mhm.
I got to get rid of it. So what I had to do is a lot of the inner work as well. What are my beliefs around money? What are my belief systems around money? How am I going about acting upon this belief about money? Right? So it's a lot of the psychological work I needed to do around it as well with my relationship to money, not just what money is. Um, so resource-wise, Gale Vaz Oxalate, Till Debt Do Us Part. Have you ever watched that show?
Yep. Yep. You recommended one
Yeah.
of the books, and I read one of them.
Yeah, I don't think she has a show anymore, but
Yeah.
Canadian reality TV used to
Yeah.
be amazing.
Yeah.
Just home building and like debt consolidation, like teaching you useful stuff.
Sure.
And so this woman, Gail Vaz Oxlade, that's what she does. She gives people strategies for getting out of debt. And it wasn't really until I came to Korea that I could start doing that.
Right.
Some of it was just the financial structures, right? Some of it was the personal stuff where I had left all my friends and family behind, right? I was totally alone. And it was the first time I could actually spend the time alone instead of always being with others. I was such an extrovert. always with other people, all of these things, which is
Right.
probably why I couldn't do certain practices. Now I was alone and I was able to just spend that time and look at how I'm doing things. And so really what I did, I got hardcore. I used a lot of her strategy. I got hardcore. I got clear about my debt repayment, about my funds, and I physically took out the money, the cash, and I had paper cups lined up every month with what they were for budget. And I actually put the physical cash there, and I did that. And I had to do that for almost a year or so before I could really get the process down of how I'm spending and accounting for and all these things. Because the modern world, especially Western world, is set up like the casino is to separate you from your money without you even really paying attention to it.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're already in debt, you never really have money. If you owe 5 grand, then what's the difference of owing 8 grand or 10 grand? It doesn't psychologically, it doesn't make much of a difference, right? And this is how you see very successful business people operate, because that's the Trump mentality, right? If I owe $10 million, I have a problem. If I owe you $150 million or $1 billion, we have a problem, right?
Mhm.
And so understanding these sort of things just about myself, right? So I applied these principles, and then I could start to get, a lot of this is over years of work as well, right? But then just budgeting, sticking to the budget, and then as you were saying before, was looking at my value systems, right? My value structures. So if my thinking, ideally, if the way I'm living my life is based off of my value structures and my belief systems, those are the two structural substrates or pillars I need to really do investigative work on to make sure that I have influenced them in the direction that I want them to be moving, right? So that they're serving me to get me to where I want to go. And so I'd have to look at um, again this value structure. Well, what do I want to spend money on? Right? When I was younger, you know what it's like to be young and partying and all of that stuff. You get caught up in it, and you can spend so much money boozing, right? And trying to impress people and trying to be in the know and all of that stuff, right? And the FOMO and all of this stuff. And that's where, I would sell CDs back in the day, right? This is the age thing. I would sell CDs secondhand to get booze money for the evening or something like that, right? To go party. So that's also like the yoga and meditation, all that stuff has allowed me to grow to an extent that my values and my behaviors, they're much more aligned. So when I spend money, yeah, I'd rather spend my money on things that serve me. So for example, I have a TV now. This is the second time I bought a TV because I just moved here, a few months ago.
Sure.
But this is the second time I've had a TV in 15 plus years. That doesn't mean I don't watch stuff.
Yeah.
It just meant that I didn't value spending the money on a
Oh,
TV
right.
when I have a phone or a computer, right?
Yeah.
Well, now I'm at a different point in my life and the price is negotiable enough that it's worth it for me because of where I'm at in my life, right? To have a TV. Now I don't have the top of the line, the nicest, whatever, but I have what's good enough for me now because it's not something I'm investing in a lot. But I'll spend my money more in going to Bali, go spend my money on my time. For me, that is it. Is if time is money, I've already paid for this time off, right? All that hard work I did that allowed me to earn those points, that money, has allowed me to have this time to use those points for this time. Now, for some people, it might be using their money for a down payment of a house, a car, the next move, all these things. And certainly that is the case for me as well. But it's like what they say, there are different ways to sort of alleviate your suffering or make your happiness. You can, if you're contingent on getting more, then it's about working and getting more, or developing the capacity to be content with less. And maybe you know this from your own experience of traveling. That's what it certainly has done for me because I like to live a little bit lighter. I don't want to live like I remember the Western lifestyle I had. It was just accumulating a lot of stuff. And even as I live here in Asia, after a year or so, I can see how much I've accumulated just from, like who you interviewed the other day, Eric, he had sent me a thing of coffee from Hawaii. So shout out to Eric, thank you. But I was like, well, I need a coffee press now. Oh, I had been avoiding getting that because I had one before and I just didn't use it enough. I like to get my coffee outside. Well, okay, I'll get a coffee press and a grinder to this. Well, it's this much investment versus that. Well, it allows me to also change my routine and my habits, right? So the things that you're doing daily, like some people say, well, you shouldn't have that cup of coffee a day, that adds up. But for me, that's all I do basically. Those are like the biggest things I do is go to it, which is what I love about Korea. Go to a cafe, right, and read and write. Those kinds of things. That's what I love to do wherever I travel. That's what I do, along with yoga and meditation stuff. But reading and writing. So even if it's like a $4 or $5 cup of coffee a day, that for me is the investment of my enjoyment, right? Whereas when I was younger, it was Wednesday night party, Thursday night party, Friday night party, Saturday night party, Sunday night party, right? Like, I mean, I almost failed out of university from my first year because I was drinking 6, 7 nights a week. So it's a very total shift now, but this is aging and getting better and all this stuff. So yeah, the relationship with money, I'm still working on that because I'm still trying to get better at not operating from a place of scarcity, but more a mentality of abundance, right? Which is a very difficult thing to do. I remember when I first traveled and I was in bad situations in Peru and Latin America, it was very difficult for me to see that even though at the time I'm very poor and so in debt and don't have access to money on me right now, I still have more access to money than some people around me. And that was like a mind fuck for me. So that's kind of always stuck with me. So how can I also give back when I have some? Because I start to have that scarcity that people are going to take it all. It's all going to be gone. And when you live poor and you grow up poor, especially if that's a source of tension in your household and a lot of trauma when you're younger, I think it's going to be around, right? Meanwhile, most divorces, economics are a source of the tension in relationships and in general in people's struggle in life, right? Like Leahy, the actor that plays Leahy, John Dunsmore, before he died, he was in an interview, that's what he was saying about being a struggling actor, right? And he had all these mental health considerations. But he's like, but you can imagine being a struggling actor in the 70s in Halifax, Nova Scotia. It would have been very difficult. And what he's come to realize is that a lot of the depression and mental health issues that a lot of people experience, a lot of it also just stems from finances, just not having money and not being financially literate with it. But, we have a big problem in our civilized society with that, right? And this pandemic is emblematic of that, right? You have record unemployments in countries around the world, and you have record growth of billionaire assets, right? It's so the biggest driving factor for me with finances is the anger and everything I have around what it is done, what is done with it in the negative sense. And like Dead Prez, my favorite hip hop group, that's what they talk about, like getting free, get free, get free. Whereas 50 Cent was all about get rich or die trying, they're about get free or die trying. And that liberation is exactly in line with yoga, meditation, the spiritual path, these things. And the finances are absolutely part of that, right? To get yourself as free as possible so you can do what you want to do, right? Rogan and them start to call it the fuck you money. Because when you have enough of that money that you can do whatever you want to do, well, what will you do? And that's the way I look at buying this time for me is I'm not buying a house. I'm not making these changes right now. Especially it's the pandemic. I'm using this as time. I've bought this time to work on my upgrades. I'm working on upgrading myself, reconnecting, rejuvenating my nervous system, all of those things to make sure I'm ready for the next iteration, the next round of life.
Yeah, that's perfect. So speaking on like time, and I know you care about your time and you're a person that sets up a lot of boundaries in their life. Can you talk a bit about how like with people, like I know you won't let certain energies into your life. Like you're
Mm.
very careful of your, is that, am I wrong in saying that?
No, you're absolutely right. I'm laughing only because I get the sense that you're sort of moving through this stuff now, where it's things that you've been posting, which is just that negative energy and all that stuff, right?
Right,
And
right.
so as you're saying it, I also am laughing at the fact that it's sort of a nice way to put it. Some people might say I'm very like a curmudgeon and very standoffish or whatever, right? But
I mean, I don't
um,
think so. I think I do that as well very much now, but I probably just disguise it more. Do you know what
yeah.
I mean?
Yeah. I look at 39. I'm like, I don't have much. I don't have many more fucks to give, right?
Right,
And so, but you're absolutely right. Like, as I had kind of had said before, for me, it's finding those boundaries that work for me,
right.
right? From one side to the other side, finding the middle way. And I usually start or err on the side of being very rigid is
Right.
my problem. I get very rigid with things. But the nature of sort of my upbringing, childhood trauma, background, all these sort of
Yeah.
things have sort of made it easy to walk away from people. I mean, I changed high schools as well. I was a captain of my football team and I changed high schools, and all of those things were kind of difficult, but in a way it was somewhat easy for me because I would compartmentalize, and
Yeah.
all the emotional stuff that would be difficult of letting go and moving on, I just didn't deal with at the time,
Right.
right? And so, how do I think of it now? Because I'm sort of the other way. When anyone wants my time,
Yeah.
if it's in good faith and all that stuff, I'm going to give it to them. I
Sure.
think about the way I would teach my students. All of you get my time. The ones that want more of it, that are putting in that effort, you get
Yeah.
more of it.
Right.
I'm willing to give more of it, but if you're not going to meet me halfway, then there's not like I'm not going to give more of it because I'm just pouring water into uh, a vessel that has holes in it or something,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like,
Well, I think like,
and so
and why I bring this up as well is not just because of like your time management skills, but when you do that, that means that when I get some time with you, I'm going to respect that time. I'm going to treat you differently because I know you don't normally just give it out to anyone, right? So I'm going to be a little bit more respectful within that time, right? It's just, and you
yeah.
know, that's even subconscious. Whereas if it's someone that I know they're always hanging out, I might treat them differently. And I know I've done that myself, right?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Actually, I think that's a great point because it's not just proximity to the other individual, it's also um, teaching people how you want to be treated and how you value time and all those things. But like that for me goes back to this other side of money, which is time, right?
Yeah, that's
And how some of us think about it. And when I was younger, I was sort of raised with this idea about respecting time,
mm,
that don't make others wait, always be early, because it says that if you make them wait, it says that your time is more valuable than theirs, that kind of thing.
right.
um, but but that's one aspect of it. The energetic aspect is something else. So now if I'll tie that back into yoga, this is how
Yeah.
it sort of looks in yoga, right? If you're talking about they have something called the pancha meaning five, pancha koshas, the five bodies. So when you're doing asana, this physical practice, it works on the gross body, right? Like this, on my muscles, my ligaments, these things. But there's four other subtler bodies in the yogic philosophy, in Buddhist philosophy, right? In Chinese philosophy, right? If you have like Chinese medicine, you know this prana, chi, ra, this sort of energetic systems, right? And this is what yoga talks about then. So you're working on, if once you're moving past the gross, you're starting to work on like subtle systems, subtle energetic systems within the body. And so for me, it is a little bit of blending both, respecting what I'm experiencing and feeling in both sides. So not just the time with someone else, but the energy of someone
Mhm.
else.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's not just this person's negative. Like for a long while, like it was just that. Like this person just every word out of their mouth is negative and pessimistic and depleting and defeating. And for every solution, they find a problem. It's just draining to be around that person. Yeah, that's one thing.
Mm,
But as I've continued to practice and stuff, I can also start to feel a deepening of the energy. Who holds space well?
mm,
I start to really become inspired by people that, like, if we have a conversation, in the past, I would always be doing this speaking, going faster and stuff, because I have a lot I think I can say and whatever. But I would notice that people that are in your role right now, I would never really consider it. The ability to sit and hold space is more than just attenuating to what they're saying, right? Because in psychology, like Dr. Daniel Siegel calls it feeling felt, right? This idea that when we share space, you are feeling what I'm saying, right? And there's an empathic sort of exchange going on. But in this energetic systems idea, there's also energetic exchanges happening, right? And in the yoga world, they do this sort of stuff all the time when you're holding heart space. And because if you're looking at the seven sort of main chakras, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone's sort of familiar with that, right? Is aligning certain vibrational pathways and stuff like that. But other people's energy, yeah, I kind of worked through that. I don't want to be around someone with this sort of energy or that, or how it makes me feel. But I think that also needs to be investigated because, just because there's a feeling doesn't mean it's valid, right? So it's sort of sitting with that and exploring if that feeling is sort of coming from within, if it's something that maybe another person is giving you, because they're all sorts of cues that we don't consider, right? There's biofeedback cues like facial feedback, right? If you look a certain way, you do this, whatever. Um, but interoceptive cues as well, right? Like how my body is just feeling in space. The fact that we're both mammals and we have certain mammalian hardware that can kind of make us vibe in a certain way, right? If you sense danger, even if it's real or not, if your nervous system is operating out of a sense of danger, right? This fight or flight system is operated. Your breathing is shallow and rapid. All of these things, that's sending my mammalian hardware these signals too, that there's something I should be concerned about, right? For safety, right? And so I have to work with that physiology. So this is what I mean, like working with yoga and meditation, all that stuff allows me, or allows one, to sit with all of that stuff in awareness, make space for it, and not try to necessarily react to it. And that's the sort of principle of meditation in general, is to sort of be the witness to what is arising and not be attached or identified with what is arising in conscious awareness, right? So you're sort of distancing yourself from the attachment to sort of these objects in awareness and being identified, connected to what is subject in that field of awareness.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. That was great. Yeah, I'm glad every single thing I brought up, I'm really glad I brought it all up. And I mean, I didn't talk a lot in this one because I didn't feel like I needed to. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Not like just like this was actually to me in my mind, even preparing for this, I was even like this. I'm going to receive. Like this is a
Yeah.
huge. Like I'm just gonna get a bunch of information. This is a blessing. And whereas a lot of people, like you might say, "Oh, I talk so
This is
much."
a blessing. You're welcome.
Yeah, you might say, "I
This is
talk."
what I do.
No, it's like it's
I bestow blessings. I bestow.
That's awesome, dude. I'm gonna call this podcast number 17. Mike bestows blessings. Uh,
Oh, 17, one shy of my favorite number.
what's that? 18?
18. Chipal.
It might be 18. Okay, well, I might just move stuff around so that you're 18 if you like that number. Hey, do you have a prediction for the McGregor Dustin Poirier? Because you like him. You like Poirier.
I love Poirier. Yeah, I love
I
Poirier.
Well, I go to his Instagram and you've always liked the picture before me.
Yeah. He's one of my favorites. Because of his mind sight. So his insight, he's been sort of the opposite of McGregor. McGregor's been the rise to fame very quickly, right? Of course, there's a lot of back stuff that people don't see, but he gets into the UFC, he dusts up, he sparks my all-time favorite fighter in 13 seconds, and my heart is still broken. And he talks a lot of shit, and he does this and all of that stuff, and he rises to fame quickly and bounces and whatever. And Poirier is the opposite: setback, 5-fight win streak, setback, 5-fight win streak. Everything is paid, as he says, paid in full, blood, sweat, and tears. He's worked for every single piece of that, right? And so I love his mindset. He'll say things like paid in full, 25 minutes to make life fair. in times when he lost to Khabib, he said, as I've learned, when times are bad, be grateful. Or when times are good, be grateful. When times are bad, be graceful. And a fight is not a fight until there's something to overcome. Adversity introduces a man to himself. And I love that mentality. I think like when he's finished, he should absolutely be a sports psychologist for fighters. He seems to understand how the interior spaces of that world and how to objectify it and how to help lead people around those sort of internal hurdles. So do I have a prediction? My heart really wants DP, Dustin Poirier, to win. It really does. Fighting for me, which is funny because it's the yoga meditation. But you like fighting, and I get this from yogic worlds and communities a lot, because they're like, dude, Abiyat, like ahimsa, non-violence. How can you be about fighting and violence? And I'll let them figure that out, because justifying the beauty of MMA and the realness of it is, beyond the scope of this podcast, right?
Yeah.
But my heart says DP. My heart wants Dustin Poirier to win. My head sort of leans toward what everyone else is saying, which is McGregor. But I gotta say, I'm watching all the lead up to it, all the interviews, and again, they're in Fight Island in Abu Dhabi, and McGregor comes in the next day off a yacht. Everything with him is pomp and fair, right? The dog and pony show, and all of that stuff is fine, right? The hype, believe in yourself, you're talking, all that stuff is fine, because when you go into the cage, the truth is exposed. You can't hide from it, right? We'll see if everything McGregor's said he's been doing is enough. I sort of am hoping and thinking it might not be. Yeah, he wants to recapture magic. He wants to do this. He has everyone, McGregor's back, believing in the thing. And I sort of think the game might not matter. It might not matter. The game might have moved past you because you took it for granted and you got carried away with the fame of it and all that stuff. And it may not. He may do the same thing. Maybe 60 seconds he finishes Poirier, but I'm pulling for Poirier, and I'm really hoping Poirier will do it. And if he does, it will be a bigger moment than McGregor winning. If McGregor wins, it's going to be a big moment because they will make it one. But if Poirier wins, it's an actual bigger moment. It's the same thing they say in fighting. Right now, they say a lot of McGregor, Khabib. That's the biggest fight you can make. That's the biggest fight you can make. They keep saying this, the media and Dana White and everyone. It's the biggest fight you can make. What do you mean by biggest fight? You have to operationally define. They mean the most pay-per-views, the most money it can be generated. They don't mean competitively, stylistically, or anything like that. And that's why someone like even Khabib is like, it's not the biggest fight you could make. He dusted him very easily, like he's done everyone else, right? So this is one of the biggest fights you can make, Poirier McGregor 2. I didn't think McGregor would do a rematch. It's funny how a lot can happen in a short amount of time, because Conor, in my opinion, Conor had all this bad PR, right? Punching an old man in a bar for not taking his whiskey and taking a fan's phone and all this stuff, and these sexual allegation stuff and blah, 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 all that stuff, right? He had to do some PR. And Dustin Poirier has great PR because he's just a good dude. He's got a charitable foundation. He's married to the woman that's seen him through it all. He's got the kid, like his daughter, and he is that. He's not trying to be something that he is not. He's not claiming to be something he's not. He's doing that work. So it's good PR. It's a good PR opportunity for McGregor. So he's playing it that way so far. So no, I can't give you an actual prediction. I want Poirier to win. I mean, who will win? That's so difficult to ascertain. I'm going to say Poirier. I'm going to say Poirier, 5-round decision.
Yeah, I think that's actually kind of cooler, because when you ask people, it's like, well, why don't you just tell me, who do you want to win? Right? It's a more interesting. Yeah. Okay. I gotta wrap it up. Obviously, I gotta go do more stuff.
Yeah.
I'm not in that cool lifestyle yet that you have. Thank you for doing this, man. Thank you for always being so humble. I think you've accomplished a lot. But I know you don't always sell it that way.
Hey man, I really appreciate you saying that because game recognized game, right?
Sure, sure.
And I love the saying that I love the saying a lion does not concern themselves with the opinions of sheep, right?
Right.
And in this hyper connected day and age, right, where it's the attention economy and the information age, it's so easy to get pulled off of your path and
Yeah.
to start doing what you think is going to be for others and all of that stuff. And it's so difficult to be true to yourself and even to get space and find what is true for you and find that stillness, right? Like Kanye West says, I had treasures in my own mind, but couldn't open up my own vault, right? It's like, how are you going to find the space to do that? And so when I am doing that, yeah, I try to be humble about it, but I also try to be considerate to myself and say, you have done this.
Yeah.
But I appreciate a lot when people I respect, who I see them going out there doing things that are challenging, difficult, outside of the comfort zone, all these things, when they give me sort of respect, I really appreciate that because I take that more to heart than someone whose opinion I don't value, right?
Yeah.
Just somebody I don't really know. I don't value how they're doing, what they're doing in their life.
Right.
And if they get criticism or praise, it doesn't mean as much. And so I see you out there, you're doing this, right? Like a podcast is something I've wanted to do for years and haven't done it. And you're just doing it.
Right.
And it can be just as simple as that. And I'm still, whatever's in the way for me of getting started is still there. I'm working through it.
Mm.
But it is, I'm inspired to see you going and doing these things as well and just being you, living authentically yourself, right? So that is, right, yoga,
Yeah.
to live authentically yourself, right? The purpose of a lifetime is to be who you are, as Joseph Campbell says.
Right.
And so the more that you're getting to do that, to me, that is yoga, whether you have like sort of an asana practice or not, that is yoga. I think yoga and meditation and breath work and these things just really support the continued growth and change of that. But
Well, I'd love to
yeah,
be
man, let's do it again.
Yeah, let's do it again for sure.
Well, I want to talk to you offline
Yeah, we'll
about
talk in a second.
setting it up and stuff. Okay.
Everyone watching, thanks so much, Mike. Thank you so much. I'm going to listen to this again. This was good. Thank you, guys. Bye.